This episode is brought to you by Podcorn. Now, if you guys haven't heard about Podcorn in the past, Podcorn is brought to you by the team that also brought you FameBit, which is a YouTube influencer marketplace that was acquired by Google and YouTube. Now they are leveraging their experience and offering the same benefits and same expertise for podcasters. Now, Podcorn is something that I personally use to find sponsors and brandship opportunities. And to give you a brief overview, it's a marketplace that connects podcasters to amazing sponsorship opportunities and brands that are out there. And with Podcorn, there is no middleman, which means podcasters of all sizes can browse and choose opportunities right on the platform, set their own rates, and collaborate with brands directly without any exclusivities. And the mission of the marketplace is to give podcasters transparency, creative freedom, and full control of how and when we monetize. So I highly recommend you guys check them out. If you're a podcaster or if you're a creator of any sort, click the link in my show notes to sign up to Podcorn and start browsing sponsorship opportunities. All right, guys, off to the show. Bonjour, friends. Today we have another episode with the one and only Gaby Dunn. She is the host of a popular podcast called Bad with Money. She is an actress. She is an author of the book called Bad with Money. And we are going to talk about some pretty exciting stuff. Normally I would have a very centered, focused interview where I was going to talk to her a little bit about money. And the conversation shifted into all sorts of different fun places like polyamory, transgenderism, bisexuality, all of these things that Gaby has experienced fully and is completely transparent about, which I really appreciate. Overall, she is an awesome, full of burst personality, and I can't wait to hear what you guys think about this conversation. So I hope you enjoy with this conversation with Gaby and I. It was a longer one than we usually do, but for good reason. So I hope you enjoy and look forward to your feedback. Gaby Dunn, thanks so much for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me and for being patient. I love that this is like a show about whatever, being intelligent or something, and I was like so overslept. It's fine.
No, definitely not about being intelligent. That's at least not on my side. So you're all good there.
I did wear my dad's fanciest shirt for you, so eventually I got there.
I'm so honored.
Thank you. It's already going really well.
Right? Good start. Well, I'm excited to dig in. Obviously, one of the things I love about the work that you've done is just the breadth of topic. We just kind of mentioned this off air and how versatile of subjects you go into, from money to polygamy to bisexuality.
Mm-hmm.
It really
spans polyamory. I don't want to get married to multiple people, but polyamory.
Gotcha.
Polygamy.
See, the thing is, this is talking about intelligence. I don't even know what the differences are.
Polygamy is like marrying two different people, which I think like is more acceptable in like the Mormon faith, whereas like I think might be illegal. It's kind of, but like more so polyamory is like just, it's hard because then you get into like what's legal and why isn't it legal to be married to more than one person and all this like other stuff that I think people in like monogamous relationship structures would be shocked by or whatever. But
yeah, is that because you're against, like, you don't want to be married at all? Like, that's not something you're thinking about?
I do, but I also, like, as a queer person, feel like sometimes there's a big emphasis on marriage that I'm like, well, it's okay. Like, I think I love, I mean, obviously, like, I was stoked that marriage equality passed, and like I've heard a lot of interviews with the AIDS act, or one of the gay activists, Cleve Jones, like an early gay activist, and he's talked about how like marriage equality meant so much more than just like we can get married. It meant like getting your partner's pension and being able to see them in the hospital, and being able to have access to their things where like maybe their homophobic family before that would have like left you destitute and things like that. But I'm also like, that's great that we like got what straight people already have. Like, now let's tackle the things that are specific to our community. But that's a controversial take. Yeah.
Why is that controversial? I feel like people in general, whether they're straight or gay, don't have strong feelings about marriage these days. And a lot of people are postponing marriage just because a lot of women now are thriving in their careers later into their careers. You know, probably not equal pay, you know, we can go into that, of course. But it's certainly a lot of variables around why people don't want to get married. Or get married a little later on. Why was it controversial?
Because I think like because it's such a basic thing that we like didn't have, that like was like something that straight people had, and it was so like obviously unfair, like basically unfair. And then it feels like we don't then get into like the specific issues of the community. Like let's get into like trans healthcare. Let's get into like, you know, like violence against like domestic violence against like queer women. Like, I don't know. It's just kind of this thing that I'm like, I think we have like other problems, but that aren't related. I think it's easy for a community to sell I think it's easy for an oppressed minority to sell a majority on wanting what they want. And I think it's harder to sell them on, hey, I know you don't need this or understand this, but we need this and you need to respect us. Does that make sense?
It does. And it seems like same-sex marriage is so like far, like it's almost like it's not even the benchmark. I feel like it's just like a right. And I would imagine for you guys, it's like, oh yeah, we should have had this like way long ago. And let's move on to the things that we're still behind on. Is that your take on that?
Yeah, but I don't want to disparage the people who fought so hard for it. And I think like, you know, I think it was a huge victory. And I think listening to people like Edie Windsor and Cleve Jones talk about it, like the elders, you know, who are like, no, you don't understand. You have it way better than we did. I think it's like the younger generation maybe doesn't listen to them enough. And I think like we absolutely, I think like there's sometimes a thing of, well, what are these people doing now? We don't care because what they did in the past, because what are they doing now? And it's like, you don't know what they went through. Like, you don't know like how good you are born into having it. So like, I think sometimes I wonder about like if the younger generation is up to date on who fought for what, you know, or like what taking things for granted, I think. Or just not even taking the thing for granted, but taking for granted the people who fought for the thing, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I feel like that's common probably in a lot of other aspects, I guess, as well. I'm sure there are things that you and I have today that, you know, if it wasn't for, I mean, you could go all the way back to Christopher Columbus, I guess, and all these other people, but yeah.
Yeah, well, Christopher Columbus should have stayed where he was. In Spain. You should have stayed where you are. Yeah. You should have stayed in Spain.
Listen, I have nothing to do with Christopher Columbus. I'm staying out of this, okay?
You should have stayed in Spain where you are. Yeah. And also, it's funny with marriage. I think like, I was watching The Bachelorette last night, and people are like, my parents were together for 45 years. And I'm like, well, yeah, for like 20 of those years, like divorce wasn't a thing. And then for like 20 more of those years, your mom wasn't legally allowed to have a credit card. So like,
Bachelor is the one where there's multiple women going for one man, or is it multiple men going for one woman?
This Bachelorette. So this is multiple men going for one woman, which you want to talk about polyamory. I love that show is like one of the most popular shows in America. And I'm like, that's what polyamory is. You did it. But they're like, no, because she has to choose one at the end. And I'm like, okay, but imagine if she didn't.
Talk to me a little bit about that. How long have you... are you in a polyamorous relationship right now?
Oh boy.
Or have you been?
Almost always. I mean, I've kind of known that about myself for a while, but my partner now is also poly. So that's great because a lot of times I'll date the monogamous person and then they'll be like, yeah, I could totally try it. And then they'll have a full meltdown, which like makes total sense. This was not the structure you wanted.
Yeah.
But it's my partner's poly, and then it's been great because like we both are, and we have like different needs regarding it. But every relationship is different. I mean, in one relationship, we literally had like a Google Doc with the rules. In another relationship, it was a guy who would just be like, hey, I'm gonna go like meet up with someone, and I would be like, have fun. And he'd be like, do you want to come? And I'd be like, I really am cozy here, so see ya. Which is like, because I think like there's a lot of, I think there would have been like arguing, right, of like no, I want to hang out with you, and me being like, I have work to do or whatever. But like it was great to me to be able to be like, I can't hang out, like I have work, and him being like, all right, well, I'm gonna go like party and maybe meet someone, and I'd be like, have fun. Like I like don't I think like it frees up a lot of time for me, which maybe is not like it just feels like you don't have to be everything to every person. And in my like history, if someone's gonna leave you, they're gonna leave you. Like if they're gonna leave you for someone else, or they're gonna leave you in general, like they still left you. So if the relationship is solid and there's like honesty, and there's not like, I don't really have a lot of jealousy, which is I think maybe a gift and a curse in some ways, because I've had partners be like, well, I want you to like feel jealous, and I'm like, no, do what you want. Like, but I think like, and I think it's uneven sometimes, right? Where like, I'm like, have fun, do whatever you want. My partner's like, well, I would be upset if you did this. And I'm like, but I want to. It's hard to, I've had like one relationship where we both were just like not jealous, and we were like, Godspeed. But yeah, it's a lot more talking and being honest than you would want to be. Like a lot of times you would just never have this conversation. Like you would just be like, whatever, I'm going to like text this person. I'm in a monogamous relationship. I flirt with my friend at work. Who cares? Whereas like in a non-monogamous relationship, like something might happen with that friend at work. So you kind of have to be like, hey, there's this person at work that like, I'm interested in. You know what I mean? Like it's like almost painfully honest. Cause like in another relationship, you would just be like, I don't have a crush on my friend at work. That would be crazy, you know? But like, you're lying.
It is a lie.
Right.
It is. I mean, but I think it's okay to feel attracted to someone, even if you're in a monogamous relationship.
I know, but people hate it. People hate it.
People hate it, but I feel like to repress those emotions and not talk about it, to deny the fact that you're attracted to other people
makes no sense
while you're in
me.
a relationship, it's only going to make you want to get out of the relationship more, I feel. Obviously, maybe you're not going to take actions if you're in a monogamous relationship, but yeah, polyamorous relationships are fascinating to me. And it's probably, does it work better if you're not the jealous type, I would imagine?
Yeah, yes, but I'm like running into trouble now because I don't understand the other person's experience. So like, I'm like, well, that's not fair. I just told you, I like let you go do whatever you wanted. Why can't I go do what I want? And they're like, because I feel jealous. And I'm like, what does that even mean? Like why? I like, I'm not going to leave you. So what is there to, And they were like, I don't know, I just have feelings about it, which like I think is most people. They're not going to be like, I understand why. I just like whatever you just suggested gave me like a pit in my stomach, you know? But I'm like,
Yeah.
why? But I think like so it's hard for me to relate to the other person's experience, which I think causes problems. Why are you fascinated by it?
It's just so outside of my norm based on the environment that I grew up in, right? Mm-hmm. My parents are divorced, but I grew up in a very conservative South Korean environment. And despite me coming to Canada when I was about 7 and from Korea, I still grew up in that environment, right? And even just society as a whole, I feel like it's just not as well practiced. Maybe LA is probably, and like a lot of New York, LA is a bit
maybe not
ahead of the curve in stuff like that.
People are still like, what? Yeah.
Yeah. The funny thing is polyamorous relationships is actually the more supposedly natural thing for human beings to do, right? From an evolution perspective.
Yeah, but it depends. I mean, it depends on, some people are just not built for it, which like isn't their fault. Like it's just like I used to joke and be like, it's like not your fault. Like monogamy is a fetish. Like it's not your fault. You want to be with one person only forever, like kinky and weird. But I think like, I don't know, because penguins mate for life and like lobsters mate for life. So like it's just like whatever works best for you. I think like I have trouble with like in monogamous relationships. I was like, how much do you want to know? What is going to upset you? What do you want to know? Like what level of honesty do you want? And with poly, it's nice because you just kind of, you just are honest, although I still struggle with like how much information is too much information. Because in my head, I'm like, when someone I'm with is like has an experience or is dating someone else or whatever, I'm like, tell me everything. What's the goss? Like, you know? And then oftentimes the people I'm dating are like, I don't want to know. And I'm like, but I'm bursting with goss. Let me give you the gossip. So
now, is it different when you're dating a male? Because I understand you're bisexual as well. So is it different if you're dating someone that is male and you go into a polyamorous relationship versus a female versus going to polyamorous relationship? Which one's easier?
Oh, my partner right now is a non-binary person, transmasculine person, and I think like it just depends on if the person is used to it. Like I've dated women who were like freaking out, couldn't handle it. And I've dated guys who were like freaking out and couldn't handle it. The one partner I've had who I think was like perfectly matched to me in terms of the relationship style, but unfortunately I did not like him enough, which is like, but he was a cis guy who was just like, we were the same. But my partner now is a non-binary person, trans person, and they like went into it identifying as poly, as did this other guy. The one guy I'm thinking of who didn't identify as poly went into it with me and like learned a lot and was like definitely like experimenting in part of it, but eventually he like, it was like, it's too much. And he, I think, is with someone now where they're monogamous. And the woman that I was dating, this long-term girlfriend I had, we like were non-monogamous, but she also had a lot of issues with it and was very like nervous and monogamous, I think, at heart. And then, my partner now, I already identified as poly. The other guy already identified as poly. It depends on like where they're at in their journey, you know, like I dated a woman who was married. So she was married to her wife, and then she and I were dating, and that was great. But the wife was very jealous, which was kind of funny because their relationship structure was already poly, where they already dated multiple people. And then when I started dating the wife is when she kind of got really jealous and upset, but that was just, I think, about me specifically. So like, it really depends on the situation. Like, I think if her wife had been dating someone else, maybe she wouldn't have had the same, like, I don't like this, you know?
Yeah.
It's really individual.
I think, yeah. Jealousy is, well, just the way we feel about people. The dynamics of it is so complicated, even just with two people, though. And I imagine having a third or fourth, or I don't know, poly could be like five people in the picture, I guess. It could really be infinite. I can see why the jealousy could trigger for you, let's say, but not for anyone else, for this wife. Maybe, partly because, sometimes you feel that there are certain people that could be a better fit for your partner, and you see that because of the characteristics that you have, or a certain look that you have, and maybe that threatened her, her relationship potentially.
Or I remind her of some girl she didn't like in high school, or I like remind her of, or my career is something she wants. It could be anything. I mean, I think there's certain people, even non-romantically, where you see them and they're like, really get your goat, because you're like, oh, I could be you. Like, you are doing the thing that I want to do, and I'm so mad. And like, how do you? Yeah,
you could remind you of their lack of actions or failures in some parts, right?
And how do you make that person? I've like really struggled with like, how do you make that person your friend rather than like stew in jealousy of them? Or how do you? Okay, I'm going to replicate what they did, or I'm going to admire them, versus like every time you see them pop up on social media being like, you make me feel like shit about myself, I don't know how. I don't know the answer to that. I'm posing that to you. I have not solved it.
Well, I think if it's your own envy, if it's your own jealousy of someone else, I think that's certainly something you can work on, because it's within your control, certainly. But if it's someone else that's jealous of you, that's trying to be in your life, I think you should cut those people out, because
I know
those are often the most dangerous people, because you just never know what's going on in their minds or what's going to happen. That's just my personal opinion. Because I don't think it's as easy to get over, especially if you're in a relationship with the other person that they're dating. It just seems quite complicated.
I even mean career-wise, right? Like, I'm sure, do you have people that you like follow on social media just to be like, I wish this was my career, I wish I was this person, and you just like, it's like digital self-harm to be like, look at them succeeding, but then you don't realize like maybe you're that for someone else, but like also like I'm trying to figure out like what the balance is with like social media of just like staring at people's pages who I think I should be, and like how much of a waste of time that is.
Yeah, I mean, I guess a lot of it is, there is some factor to having that inspiration and letting that fuel you into doing something bigger and better for yourself. But it can be very harmful, obviously, depending on how long you're staring at your phone and how many people you compare yourself to, all that stuff. So it's different for everyone, I guess.
I'm trying not to. I've gotten better at it, I think, in recent years, but then I got on TikTok, and now I see all these TikTok people who are better than me, and it's really causing a spiral.
I mean, should you though? They're like half your, like they're like 18, 16, 15-year-old girls, no?
That's what's horrible. I'm like, look at you. You already knew how to make content for the internet. Are you kidding me? No, I think you go through creative phases where sometimes, like for me, like I'll have like 2 years where the projects are like happening, and then I'll have like a period of time where I have to be like creating and I have to be making the projects. And that feels very slow to me, because I'm like, okay, I gotta write it, I gotta pitch it, like, or like I'm sitting like coming up with the ideas, and then you start the cycle over again. Because my work is, the nature of my work is that you sell something and then you work on that, and then that happens or doesn't happen, and then you sell something and you work on that, and then that happens or doesn't happen. And so like I feel like it repeats every couple years where I like start up on something else and I'm like, I hope this is the thing. And so I'm like now I'm sort of in the like phase of thinking about what I want to write and pitching and coming up with ideas versus like marinating in the ideas that like I will have to work on. And that sometimes feels depressing in some ways. But then who knows? If you had caught me tomorrow, I would have been like, I'm a genius. I've come up with the best ideas. Like
it fluctuates, right?
Yeah. Yesterday I was like, I'm a piece of shit who's never, am I allowed to curse?
Of course.
Okay. Yesterday I was like, I'm a piece of shit who's never made anything. Meanwhile, like I'm at my parents' house with like 4 books I've written on the shelf. But I'm like, you can't talk to me. I'm like, I've never done anything good. I'm a loser. And then like, who knows, tomorrow I'll think of something and I'll be like, it's incredible what a genius I am. Like it's never, I would love to be in the middle at some point.
So you're saying you're literally on the other side, which is just feeling shit about yourself.
Yeah.
And then you're on the other side, which is like feeling extremely confident.
Well, I have bipolar disorder.
There's no between.
No. Well, I have bipolar disorder and I'm on medication and stuff. But so, yeah, I think like some days you're like, wow, I can't believe what a gift to the world I am. And then like other days you're like, I'm a waste of space. I'm worthless. And for me, a lot of it is career based, which is so healthy. Let me tell you.
Especially in Hollywood where like literally everything is up in the air.
Forget it. And they could not, I mean, there's no reason or rhyme for any of it. Like I remember I was shooting a pilot for MTV in 2015 and my hair was purple. And they were like, great, we love the script, we love everything. Like we'll let you shoot it exactly how you want to shoot it. Your hair needs to be blonde. And I was like, like, I don't know if you know how long purple dye takes, but like you cannot go from purple to blonde. Like you just can't. And they were like, well, I don't know. Like your hair needs to be blonde, figure it out. And they gave me money. They were like, here's money to make your hair blonde. And I was like, my hair's going to fall out of my head. Like you don't understand. Like if I try to bleach. Yeah. And they were like, too bad, so sad. So I like went to the hairdresser and my hair was like long, like this long, how it is now, like down my back. And he like stripped it of the color. It took 8 hours. We had to cut my hair short and then add extensions. It was like a whole fucking thing just because they were like, arbitrarily, we like wish that you were a blonde. Because I don't know, because like in my mind, I'm like, why? Because like some like Demi Lovato has purple hair now, so you're like worried as an exec that purple hair will like evoke something else, like whatever like weird minor Hollywood thing. So then I did all that to my hair, and then they didn't pick up the show, and that's show business, baby.
Oh my god. Holy shit, you're basically a pawn at that point. I mean, it's just like they don't give a fuck.
Nope. And that's show business. So
oh my god. I mean, in some sense, I mean, when you look at the greatest artists, the greatest musicians, writers, a lot of them, in fact, probably most of them, they had this level of being able to have this dark side. And the funniest stand-up comedians are generally not the ones that think they're funny or think they're the greatest. It's often the people that think they're a piece of shit or
neurotic,
that they're not funny.
Yeah,
and in some ways, I'm sure that's is what makes you such a great artist and creative in different forms. So you are in the perfect industry in some sense, right? Despite how much harm it does to your mental health and how difficult it is.
I mean, I've been a writer since I was a kid. Like, all I know how to do is write. Like, I was writing when I was like in second grade, first grade. So I think like there was no option for me where I wasn't a writer. So I like went to school for journalism, worked as a reporter, was a reporter for a while, started writing scripts. I had this blog that was popular, and which was like just a blog about journalism and myself. I wrote about myself too. And I put a post up on the blog because it had like 20,000 followers. And I was like, hey guys, this was like 2011, 2012. I was like, is anyone reading this? Someone who works in Hollywood? I wrote a script. And 2 people responded. One was an agent and one was an exec at Nickelodeon. And I sent the script to them, and the agent was my first agent, Justin, who became my first agent. And then the guy at Nickelodeon, years later when I moved to LA, or a couple years later when I moved to LA, he hired me on a sketch show at Nickelodeon to be a writer. So crazy. It came from... So then I moved to Los Angeles, which I never thought. I thought I was going to live and die in New York. I thought I was going to be one of the New York people who, like, they find you in your apartment with cats, and, like, you've lived there and you're 80 and you've, like, died in your apartment. Like, that's what I thought I was going to be.
Why is that? You didn't like LA, or you just love New York so much?
Well, I think, like, I grew up in Florida, and I think a lot of queer kids have this idea of, like, I just got to get to New York. You know, like, you see the musical Rent and you're like, I just got to get to New York. That's where all the people are. And so I went to school in Boston, and then I was like, New York's where you go. Like, when you're, like, gay or queer and you're a creative and whatever, like, you just got to go to New York. But New York is hard. Like, New York is, like, struggles. And some people love it. And by the end of it, was like, I want to just take a car to a Target. Like, I wish I had a washing machine. Like, you know what I mean? Like, everything is so expensive. Yeah. It's, like, hard. You're on the subway, and, like, there's no privacy, which was such a fun thing to, like, when I moved to LA, you have, like, a home that's, like, a little bit more private, so a little bit more space, and ideally you have a car. So if I, like, wanted to have a panic attack, I would just sit in my car. Or if I wanted to have a private conversation, call someone, sit in my car. In New York, everything is so public. So if you, like, I forgot when I went back to visit for the first time, people just cry openly on the street. If you need to fight with your partner on the phone, you're doing it on, like, Avenue, like, you know, subway. Avenue A and whatever, and, like, you know, you're on the subway. If you're on the subway, if you and your partner are, like, on the subway and you start, like, arguing, or you're on a date that's going well and you want to start making out, it's not going to happen in your car because you don't have a car. You're going to try to, like, suck each other's faces on, like, the G train on the way back to fucking Williamsburg. Like, do you know what I mean? There's, like...
I feel like that's you, no? That was very specific what you just said.
Somebody mentioned, I was in a
comment.
I was in the other meeting, and somebody was talking about the McKibben Lofts, which is, like, a hipster place that people live in Brooklyn. And then I hadn't thought of the McKibben Lofts in forever. And they were like, yeah, like, we did this art project at the McKibben Lofts. And I was like, oh, I just, like, immediately flashed back to, like, being in my 20s. And I was like, oh man, like, because it's communal housing, so, like, people, like, kind of have bedrooms but not really, and it's, like, a lot of, like, hipster people, and, like, it's this, like, it's there's, like, mattresses on the floor, and it's kind of like a warehouse or whatever. And I was like, dear God, I just, like, flashed back to, like, hooking up with people at McKibben Lofts, and I was like, oh Jesus Christ. Like, were you living there, or you just went to go? I didn't live there. There was, like, I don't know. It's hard to explain. It was, like, cool, but also a stigma. And, like, I just was like, I did my 20s in New York, and, like, doing your 20s in New York is fun because you're just, I mean, there's no driving, so, I mean, there's, like, you're a mess. Like, you could do whatever you want. Like, one thing I miss about New York is you could, like, start at one bar with friends, and then someone could be like, hey, there's a party here. You're like, great, I'll go. And then someone's like, hey, we're gonna, like, go to, like, any night could end anywhere. And in LA, it's a little bit more planned. So, like, it was easier to, I mean, it could have also just been because I was in my 20s, and, like, maybe I would have been that way in any city. But I had no money. I would, like, have schemes of how to, like, make money. Like, it was, like, so specifically, I mean, like, one time, I talk about this a lot because I have a podcast about money. And I talk about how, like, I, like, would sell my items. So, like, you know, I had, like, these iPod speakers, and I was, like, had no money, and I was like, okay, I'm going to sell these iPod speakers to, like, a pawn shop. Used to love pawn shops. Used to go to pawn shops all the time. And so, like, I would go, so I was like, okay, I'm going to sell these iPod speakers to the pawn shop. And I had them in a brown paper bag, and I was walking along the street. It was the summer in New York. It was so hot. and the bag broke and the speakers fell and they shattered. And I was like, fuck, I don't have anything else to sell. And I like sat down on the ground in, I think like Chelsea, and just started sobbing. And like, it's New York. No one stopped. They were all just like, yep.
Oh my God.
Girl in a sundress crying about broken speakers. That's like a Wednesday morning. Like, who cares?
Regular Tuesday,
yeah, that's like, who gives a shit? It was like so specific. But like, if I had been in LA, I imagine like, you know, it's like a different vibe. No, maybe nobody would have stopped, but like, it would have been like maybe a more private moment. I don't know. But like, it just was like, it felt so, that to me, that memory is like so New York, but then also like, bringing a bottle of wine to the movie theater because like you don't have to drive, so you're just gonna like drink in the theater while you watch a French movie and then like go to another party. Like that is also New York to me. So like highs and lows.
Yeah. Well, one of my favorite places to go, I think it's called Nighthawk. I lived in Williamsburg.
Oh my God, it's awesome.
What's it called again?
Nighthawk Cinema. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Nighthawk Cinema. So I lived right across from there, where they have like the little grocery store, like a little like supermarket, like literally right above. And I would be in the bedroom there, and I would always see people talking about the movie outside. And I'd be like, fuck, like I need to wear earplugs because I was just about to go see the movie and people just talk about the ending and how crazy it was. I'm like, oh my God.
That is such a beautiful New York story, no?
It is. It's just like everything is so connected. You can't really escape the scene.
Yeah.
It's always just happening.
Yeah. Like you're like never alone. In LA, if I wanted to walk outside at like 2 a.m, nobody's there. But I mean, and we're talking like pre-corona. But like in New York, if you walk outside, like and go, you might run into a friend. Who knows? You might like go. You might like. There's like something for you to do or whatever. And I just like I was ready to leave when I left. Like I was like, I'm over this. And like, it's such a struggle. Yeah. Like every day is hard. Like we're talking about it like being funny, but it's also like some days you're like, I don't need to be on the subway with this person who's like openly eating a tuna sandwich and like sneezing into it and like eating it. Or like, I don't want to like just like have to carry my groceries up 5 flights of stairs. Like I hate everything. So I was like ready to go when I left. And now I've been in LA for like 7 years. I love LA too. I don't think there's like I like have a lovely house. There's like a yard, you know, like and for the amount of money that probably my friends pay in New York for like a shoebox, you know.
Yeah. Did you know anyone in LA when you first moved here, or did you have to build your circle again? That's the hard part, right?
Yeah. I mean, I sobbed when I left New York because I had a going away party and like, you know, I was like going to miss my friends. And me and my friend Nick were in the corner and I was just like sobbing because I've known him since college and he's like very like the epitome of New York to me. Like he's a New York guy. So that was like sad. But, did I have to start over? Yeah, I had like some comedy friends. I had a couple friends from college. I met my girl that I do my podcast with 7 years ago. I met her like on the street in LA outside of a comedy club.
No way.
So that was like, you know, serendipitous. And I met this one girl on Twitter named Brittany Nichols, who we followed each other on Twitter. And now like 7 years later, like I talk to friends and I'll be like, how did we meet originally? And it's always like through Brittany. And I'm like, through Brittany. Right. My partner's a musician. My partner was doing a music video. And I was like, who initially emailed me to be in that music video? Because that's how we met. I was in the video. I was like, who emailed me to be in the video? And I looked it up and it was Brittany.
Wow. So she's like the super connector that you got.
Super connector. Everyone has met through Brittany, which I was like, wow, I never realized how much. Like I emailed her and I was like, you get to make a speech at our wedding. And I was like, and I was like, she's a comedian. So I was like, you get a tight 5 and it better be good.
If that wedding happens, of course.
Exactly. if that wedding happens, I look forward to Brittany's stand-up. I look forward to Brittany emceeing the wedding.
Well, I want to get into a bit about the book itself, of course, but talking about kind of Bad with Money, of course. Given the concept of like LA versus New York, do you feel like you're spending less in LA in general?
Yeah, weirdly. I think in New York there was a lot of stuff that was hard to be convenient about. And in LA, it's like a little bit more of a convenient, softer lifestyle. Also, it's just like you're not struggling as much in the winter. Like winter clothes cost money, and like getting places, and like the idea of like, being like, fuck it, let's just take a cab. Like, this kind of stuff where like in LA, it's like doesn't really, it gets cold, but like now my concept of cold is all fucked up where I'm like, it's freezing at like 60 degrees or whatever. But like, so I think like a lot, what's interesting about the pandemic is I think people are realizing that they don't need to live in these big cities that cost so much money, and that a lot of these cities are starting to cost less, which I think has pros and cons. Like I've read a lot of articles about people who in rural areas who are so pissed because all of these city people are now moving to these rural areas, and like kind of taking over and gentrifying, which like, of course, that's what we love to do. But that like, it's people are, my friends live all over now. Because of the pandemic, like, we all lived in LA, and now like my one friend lives in Maine. She bought a house in Maine, and like, I think people are doing kind of what they would be afraid to do because they were like, I have to live in a major metropolitan city. But like now they're like, I've always wanted to live in Montana. Now I live in Montana. My like friend like met a girl on a dating app and like moved to Arizona and like lives in her house in Arizona now, and like getting to, my friend Erin is in Santa Fe. Like people who are like moving, I feel like now like younger people who are in my demographic, so let's say like young, queer, liberal, whatever, are like I'll like text a friend and be like, hey, what's up? And they'll be like, I moved to St. Louis, or I moved to like, I'm living in upstate New York now, or, like, people have, I went to Kentucky, whatever it is. Like my friends are all spread out now because everyone hangs out on Zoom anyway. And all your meetings are on Zoom. And like my one friend is like secretly in Atlanta. Like he moved to Atlanta, but he's an actor. And he said he hasn't told anyone. And he's doing all his auditions on Zoom and stuff because whatever. And he just wants to live in Atlanta, and he's tired of LA. And if he books something, he'll just fly to LA and like stay in a hotel. But when he tells the casting directors like, yeah, I'm in LA. Like he moved to Atlanta. And like, so now I feel like when this is all over, my friends are going to be everywhere, and they're going to be living in places that, like, we never thought of or would have lived, which like, again, like, I'm so sorry to the original inhabitants of those areas, but because I think they are like super annoyed by people moving out to rural places. But my partner and I were in the middle of the desert in Joshua Tree for like 3 months. We just moved to the desert. I would never have done that. Never. Because I would always be like worried that I need to be in LA for work. But it's cool that we're kind of realizing that you like don't need to be in one place for work, and that you could kind of move wherever you want now in a way that like maybe you don't need to live in that congested city. Maybe you've like always wanted to live in like, rural Oregon, and now you can. So I don't know. Yeah. I don't know how that is going to work out for local economies. And I'm sorry to anyone who's like, stay away from my town. But that's.
It helps with the real estate increase of pricing, right? If a lot of people start to move in there, I would imagine maybe it's not all positive for them,
right?
Because maybe they prefer that, but there's some benefits to it, I imagine, and it's interesting to see like the predictions of what will happen. I was reading something where the last time we had a crazy pandemic like this was the Spanish flu, and before that, getting on calls, like telephones, which was invented like 40 years before the Spanish flu, was like not a cool thing. It was like something to do if you're, it wasn't like a trendy thing to do apparently. And now after the Spanish flu, apparently the rise of telephones usage was like skyrocketed because of that. And now they're saying this is very similar to what's happening with Zoom or Skype or teleconferencing in general, where people are just getting much more comfortable with it out of force. And it's going to, what you just mentioned, it's just going to distribute people across not just the US, but across the world. It's exciting to like have predictions around like what's going to happen post corona, right? 'Cause like now we have the vaccine that's up and everything. Do you have any thoughts in terms of like what are some of the crazy predictions you think that could happen in the economy or how we work?
I love that people don't have to go into their jobs. I love not having to drive to Santa Monica to audition for something I know I'm not going to get and then to be in traffic for an hour back. I think it's like created more efficiency in work. I also think that it's created more opportunities for disabled people. I mean, so many friends of mine who are disabled have talked about how they'd apply for a job and they would be like, I'm sorry, like, you have to come in and we can't accommodate you. And like, they could have, now what sucks is they could have accommodated you the whole time. They just didn't want to. And so a lot of people now are like actually getting to work at jobs that they would have already been good at, but they just were disabled and couldn't leave their house or whatever. And so I think like now the way that we're working, I would say it will keep being more efficient and probably like more accessible. I mean, the amount of times like that I think about like how I would have had to like drive in, park, pay for parking, like do the whole thing to like go to a meeting for 20 minutes, which like now like, of course it could have been a Skype. It could have been a Skype the whole time. So like you were saying about the telephone, like probably this will change the way that we manage time, because now I'm able to do like tons of meetings back to back, whereas like normally I wouldn't be able to.
Sure.
I don't know.
And speaking of money, I think there's like arbitrage opportunities for people like your friend living in Atlanta or Maine, where a lot of times you're able to get similar amounts of earnings, but your expenses have just went like incredibly low, right? Compared to LA, New York.
Do you ever look at real estate prices in like small towns and then just feel like you want to vomit? Like, I'm like, oh my God. I'm like, I could buy a house. I mean, like in upstate New York, I could buy a house for like $200,000. The house I'm currently living in Los Angeles, if I wanted to buy it, it's $2 million. Like,
similar size? Yeah,
but the house in New York is probably bigger. Like, it's like, because there's nothing around, but like, where are we going? Like, I think I used to look at real estate prices in like smaller towns, because I'm from Florida, I'm from the South. And so I would look at like, what's the real estate price in like middle of Georgia or middle of Tennessee or something. And it's like, like you could have like so much land and like such a better life for so much, and like things cost less money. And like I remember one of the first times I was living in New York and I came back to visit Florida, and I went to a bar and I got a beer and they were like, that's gonna be $1, and I was like, $1? Like what? Like in New York this beer would be $9. So like you just don't I think maybe like, I don't know, because people are out of work and they don't have any money. And like, I think we need like another huge stimulus check. And like, I think that's US specific. And like, I think our government has not helped us enough at all. And people are super struggling. But also I think it's causing, and who knows, like maybe people in rural areas are like, this is bad because you're making our real rent prices go up. You're making our real estate prices go up. Now there's gonna be a Starbucks on the corner that's gonna put our local coffee shop out of business. I think like a lot of stuff is gonna change, maybe not for the better in some ways economically, but I don't know. Maybe they'll forgive student loans here. That'd be cool. because maybe I think a lot of what's happening in the US has made us realize how much more we need social services, that not just for people that we've stigmatized. So it's not like, ugh, like this person on welfare, you know what I mean? It's like, no, you're now like your friend is on unemployment. So
it's real.
Yeah.
It's real shit.
Yeah. It's more, it's more visible around you, the ways in which like people are have, you know, who can continue to work and who can't.
Yeah, and I think it's inflated by this idea of money being such a taboo topic. You know, this is something you certainly talk about. Like, people just don't like to talk about money in general, or oftentimes, you know, at least in my culture, just to talk about that you're struggling around money is so taboo. It's so feels ashamed, I guess, to talk about this kind of stuff. So it is very difficult. I mean, have you looked into like why this is such a taboo topic for people?
Because they've tied it to their self-worth. So they think that, and everything in our, I mean, the ways that other financial gurus talk to people, and I don't even want to put myself in that category, but the ways that they talk to people is like, you're stupid, you're an idiot, you should have known better, you did this wrong. It's very like tied to intelligence in a way that like it's not in real life tied to intelligence. It's tied to like class and how you were born and what your parents taught you. And you can be rich and bad with money just as much as you can be lower income and bad with money. And I would argue lower income people are sometimes much better with money than rich people, because they know where every dollar goes, versus like this book, Uneasy Street by Rachel Sherman, talks about like how rich people spend money. And, you know, there's one woman in it who's like, how did I spend $65,000 last month? So weird. And then just like moves on. And like, meanwhile, like a low income person would be like, my $1 went here, my $1 went here. So I would categorize that person as good with money and the rich woman as bad with money. But I think we tie it to self-worth, to like, if you're good, even to like morals, if you're a good person. And so you don't want to talk about struggling because you don't want to look stupid. You feel like everyone has learned something that you just haven't learned, and you like missed a day in school, or you just were not smart enough to pick it up or whatever, which meanwhile, most of your friends are also probably thinking that about you. Like, you think it's tied to like, if you are a good person, or if you don't want people to look at you and think like that you're a mess, or that you're like a stupid or something. I talk a lot about the prosperity gospel, which I think is partially how Trump got elected. It's this thing kind of mostly tied to evangelical churches, but it's basically the idea that like God or Jesus himself has blessed wealthy people, and that they are wealthy for the reason of that God and Jesus has blessed them. And so they must be better than us in some way. They must know something. They must be more blessed than us in order to have achieved this wealth, which, by the way, is just generational and on the backs of slavery here in the US, but whatever. And so like a lot of these people, because Trump is rich or was rich, they're like, well, he must have been chosen by God. Jesus must have blessed him. So that he must be better than us. So they vote for him. Whereas like, and I think it's that way with megachurch pastors, right? Like, though my megachurch pastor, like, I'm struggling, but he has a private jet. But that's because Jesus has blessed him for being special and better than me. And so, like, that's a thing that I, like, ruminate on and fixate on and makes me furious. But like, so I think if it's not that literal for you, like, if you're not like, Jesus has blessed this person, whatever, it still trickles down into your mentality where you're like, well, this person must be smarter than me. You know, this person's an entrepreneur, this person, fake ideas. This idea that like Jeff Bezos funded Amazon in a garage, like he can do it. Why can't you? I don't know. He had an infusion of money from his father. Do you have that? Like, I think like there's all this kind of these narratives that were fed of like, working hard and pulling yourself up by your bootstraps and blah, blah, blah. So like when you say like you're having problems with money, people are like, something's wrong with you. Rather than being like, something's wrong with the world, the social services available to people. I mean, I wrote an article about why student debt should be canceled. And I had people come at me being like, well, if that happened, like there, you know, there would be an infusion of money to certain people, and then other people who didn't go to college wouldn't have blah, blah, blah. And I was like, oh, so the idea is we should just not cancel student debt and we should just let everyone suffer? How about we argue, okay, do this canceling of student debt and give us Medicare for all, and give us better social services, and provide better services for people who, instead of the school to prison pipeline or whatever. People think so small. They're like, well, we can't possibly do this because then this will happen. And I'm like, there's answers to how that other thing could also, things could be good. Did you know that? But because we're so individualistic and we associate it with poor judgment or you did something wrong rather than we are being failed,
Yeah, for sure. I think, I don't know if it's just America, but America certainly has this high correlation of self-worth and how much money they make. And it's interesting because you look at countries that don't have that, and you go to the Philippines, to a lot of the rural parts in Mexico, and oftentimes just a lot of the poorest places, they are so much happier, and they have way less than the poorest person in America. And it's just the wiring of our brains, or what the media is teaching us, and the system in general, there is certainly something a fault to that. I don't quite know exactly what it is, but when you look at the contrast of people, it's certainly not money that's going to make you happiness. Yet the way Americans and probably even Canadians think, a lot of the Western nations think, is very backwards. At the same time, what's beautiful about America is that anyone that has the work ethic, that is able to really work for it, at least they have a better shot than most people in different nations.
Do they?
Better shot than people in India, than people in other places.
But I think
we have enough stories, at least, to show you that.
But I think the stories are false, dude. I don't think it's real. We get this very clean narrative of certain things, but you never hear. I mean, let me give you a hot take. As a white person, if you pulled yourself up by your bootstraps and you were low income and you made a lot of money and whatever, you still, because of the ways in which slavery did not allow Black people to amass generational wealth at all, and maybe you don't have generational wealth, but your parents have a house, or you were not homeless or something, you still were leaps and bounds above the majority of the Black community in America. So it's still yes, you did climb your way out, but you still had an advantage. This narrative of anybody could become this is really not true. It's possible for some people, and I'm not even talking about your parents give you $10,000. I'm talking about the basic beginnings of this country where, if you are able to have amassed any sort of wealth, you're 100 years ahead of, someone who immigrated here, or someone who, the Native Americans who, going back to Columbus, were pushed onto reservations and mass genocided, and were not able to receive the help from the government that, they're often forgotten by the larger US government in terms of social services. And I think the narrative that anybody could do it does not take into account the history of the country. And I think there are things that get conveniently erased. Oh, well, this person had an infusion of money for whatever from a parent or something. But also, there is something to, well, they had to do something with it. But I just, the gap and the ways in which the suburbs were born. So if you want to look up Levittown, people listening, it was you could not get a loan if you were a Black person, you could not get a loan. And like, if you were building your factory, like you were a business owner and you were building like your business, if you were in a white community, but you were even too, like the bank deemed you too close to a Black community, they would not approve your loan. So like white people could like walk to their jobs, but Black people, if they wanted to work at that factory, had to like commute, because the factory itself would not be able to get a loan to exist if they were literally even like a certain mile away from a Black community. Like these are things that we don't know because we don't study them. And you're like Canadian. So like this is like, I'm speaking very much for the US, but like the ways in which, people go, well, it's equal now, is like, you don't even like understand how much we purposefully started these people behind the 8 ball. So it's like the statistics are awful. The average, even the most low income white household, the average amount of money that they have in terms of assets, even. So like the idea that you could like sell your kitchen table or whatever, I think it's like, 50 or 40% more than what the average Black household has. Like it's really, 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 really racial and really divided.
For sure.
And we built it that way. It's not an accident. We built it that way. There's a book called The Color of Law, which is really great. We had him on our Just Between Us podcast, which is another podcast I do. And he talked all about it, that it's like, people are like, well, segregation, or like people are like, well, Black people live in these neighborhoods and white people live in these neighborhoods, and that's just how it happened. And it's like, he's like, no, we literally designed it that way.
Yeah.
Anyway, the US is fantastic.
It's got a lot of problems for sure. Highest healthcare costs, yet one of the lowest quality. It can go on for sure.
How's
what I was really saying.
Oh yeah.
What's that?
I was gonna say, how's healthcare in Spain?
I don't think it's like amazing either, to be honest. I have insurance here. Compared to Canada, it's definitely not up to crazy par. I'm young, at least. I haven't had anything happen, so I haven't looked into it that much. Knock on wood.
Yeah.
But yeah, I guess I was comparing more the fact that Americans as a whole, obviously there's inequality between certainly Blacks versus whites, and you can probably break that down into multiple different categories. I was really comparing more America as a whole, the people that are living there versus someone, let's say in Venezuela, or someone that is in other poor parts that can't even leave their countries. Right. So I think we're both in agreement there in terms of.
Well, Canada is great with healthcare.
We are. Yep. There is free healthcare. University is a lot cheaper.
Do you guys look at the U.S. and go, "You guys, come
on, get your shit together"?
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Sometimes. I don't think Canada is necessarily perfect either.
No, you're not. But
yeah. It's. I think America still is a place, for whatever reason, that people still gravitate to. I'm sure part of that is like media and like Hollywood films and just the attraction of that. And you get the outliers like Elon Musk or Jeff Bezos or whoever, Mark Zuckerberg, that create these big companies, and I guess people want to believe that they can do that, and that's why they go there. I guess the question is, if you are, I guess, an American, do you have plans? There must be reasons, obviously, that you're staying in America, right? Versus going to Spain or other places.
I don't know. COVID really put a damper on that. The last season of Bad with Money or the season before the last, was all about if I should move somewhere else. And I talked to people in different countries, and like people in like Sweden and Norway and like whatever are just like thriving. but it's hard because then you're far from your family, and and I talked to a lot of Americans who had just like made the move or whatever, and my friend Stevie just moved to not to London, to England, and like I just like, it's like your friends and your family, and like, but like part of me is like, I wish I could uproot all of us and move us somewhere else, like New Zealand. Oh my God, New Zealand is like just living their best lives. Like, what the fuck? Like, it's so hard because you're built up to be like, America's the best, but like it's way not. And like you don't have, it's almost like what's it called? Stockholm syndrome. Like, ironically, I would love to be in Stockholm, but like, it's just this thing where you're like, well, I know everything here, and the other place, I don't know, the plugs might be weird and it's different money, and who knows, I'm very, but like, we're not taught, I think, to be like worldly citizens the way like the EU people are. And when I was traveling, I would meet so many Australians. That's like the joke. Like, if you are like traveling in Europe or anywhere really, you're going to run into Australians. Because they go they're citizens of the world. They go places. They're sent like, like they take a gap year and they do all this stuff. And like, I think Americans are fed a lot of fear about going to other countries. Like, our narratives are like, you'll get kidnapped, like you'll get taken, the movie Taken. Yeah. Like, you'll, you go somewhere else and you're a stupid American and this and that. And it's dangerous or whatever. And like, I don't know why. I like literally during that season of Bad with Money, I realized that I like thought of Americans who moved to other countries as brave, which is like the fact that you're in Spain. I'm like, oh my God. Like,
but it's really not that hard. That's the thing. That's a crazy thing.
I know. And they don't teach us other languages, which is like, we don't really take learning other languages seriously the way that other places do, which is so fucked up. I saw the funniest article that was like, Princess Charlotte already knows 2 languages. And then someone else was like, so do immigrant kids, but you don't see us getting you don't see us getting praised. Yeah, exactly. And so like, I think we're not taught like the value of being global citizens, which sucks. I had a very good time in Belgium. I went to Belgium to visit. I loved it. I think like, I think that was like, it just seems, Spain was a lot of fun. Like, it just seems like, I mean, although let me tell you, the sleep schedule of people in Spain is not sustainable to me. You guys like have dinner at 9 p.m. and then like
siestas at 4.
Siestas at 4. Like, I can't. But like people in like Switzerland, like these countries, but also, part of the season of the podcast was sort of being like, where can you go as a queer person? Where can you go as like a, I talked to like this guy who's like the one black guy in his village in like Japan, or, in Japan, or, and like, how it is to be Black in Japan, and the way people are just like, whoa, about him. So yeah, I would love to, I would love to live somewhere else. And I hope, it's interesting because I hope that now with Zoom and everything going digital, like maybe because I always imagined I would have to live in Los Angeles. But maybe now, like, the future will be that, like, your friends will just be all over. You'll be in different places and you can still be friends, and you'll have, like, normalized FaceTiming and talking more that way rather than just seeing each other in person.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, does the fact that, you have the lifestyle of, like, the polyamorous relationships and, like, but the bisexuality, does that make you second guess, like, living in other countries that may not be as open to something like that? I don't actually know that field that very well.
Ireland, I think, just recently got gay marriage. There's definitely places where the situation is better for queer people or worse for queer people. So that is something that do have to keep in mind. And also my partner's trans, so different reactions to trans people, or different abilities to receive healthcare, like there's definitely stuff. Also traveling because their passport doesn't match their gender, and so it's like,
Right.
There's a lot of, even like, there's a whole thing of like, as being a Jewish person, as a Jewish person, I can go to Israel and immediately be a citizen, which is the law of return, which is complicated for me in a lot of ways because of the Israel-Palestine conflict.
Right.
But I definitely thought about, I definitely, when Trump was elected, was like, I could go to Israel and be immediately a citizen.
Tel Aviv. Yeah.
Tel Aviv. Oh, I had a book. I went to visit Israel
So
when I was visiting Israel, and I got a book called Don't Ask, Don't Tel Aviv, which was just all the gay clubs in Tel Aviv. That was pretty good.
What's the culture like there for the gay community?
There's definitely party spots. I think it's a different country in the sense that some parts are so religious, and then other Israelis and Jews are different. If you're very, very Jewish, that's so different than being Israeli. People in Israel are in general not as religious, and I was told that was because they believe, well, I already live in Israel. I'm already I don't need to be super religious. I think a lot of them are very secular. So you would think, there's the hugely Jewish communities there, which if you drive through them on Shabbat, they'll throw rocks at you. But if you, then, the average young people, I think, are just pretty secular and pretty similar to not very religious. I know when I was there, I was turning 20. And we went out to nightclubs and partied and went to I was in
Birthright.
I was on Birthright, yeah.
Oh, I was some stories,
on Birthright, yeah. And which is now looking back, I'm oh boy, but because calling it Birthright and that we have a right to this land is very complicated, but so a lot was super fun. It's we went to the beach on my birthday and we went to a nightclub in a lot but it's a different culture obviously too, where I found European men are this way, a little bit pushier. A little machismo, a little bit more aggressive. Which it is funny because I guess though there's different socialization where I found that the women were more able to be fuck off. So it was an interesting, it was different than being at anytime I went out to a club in Europe or in Israel, it was a different vibe. Heteronormatively, it was a different vibe between women and men, where the men were more aggressive and then the women were either more into it or more likely to be get away from me, versus there's kind of this dance in America of
yeah, they're just straight up there, huh?
I don't know, because maybe things have changed a lot, and I was 20 or 20, and then when I was in Europe I was 23, maybe 24, but there's no ma'am, may I dance with you? It is grab. You are grabbed. Yeah.
Yes.
So it very touchy, which is it's a different culture.
Yeah, I think it's still that way. By the way, a lot of my best friends are from Israel as well, and it's just that way of life. And some people love it, some people hate it.
It's very interesting. It's also I think American. I'm generalizing so much, but I think American men are very much nervous about being too much or whatever, and Israeli men are just like, I like you, you're beautiful. You're like, oh my God, okay.
Sure.
Which I found similarly to in Spain too, where they were like, but I think sometimes now I'm looking back on it and I'm like, maybe they're just that way with American girls, because girls in their own culture would be like, get the fuck away from me, and American girls are like, ha 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 ha, okay.
It could be, yeah.
I do know
I think there are more like restrictive gender roles from what I understand in places like that. I mean, it seems like America is pretty good based on what we just said. Based on
yeah. But in Israel, you know, the women are also in the military, and so I think there's like a strength in a way. I don't know. I mean, I go back. It's compulsory military, like experience. You know, service is would not work in the U.S. I think people would flip out. So I don't know.
Yeah. It's a complicated topic.
Yeah.
It's a complicated topic.
Yeah.
Well, Gaby, do you have any exciting projects that you want to plug? Anything that you want to share that you're working on?
Yeah.
Apart from you moving to Spain or Israel?
I had an Audible original come out recently called Apocalypse Untreated, which is a narrative podcast about mental health and ironically teenagers living through the apocalypse and their mental health during that, which we recorded in February, so there's no way I could have known that this would happen. And also the Bad with Money podcast, which you can get anywhere podcasts are, and that's all about finances and money and the emotions behind it. And it gets very political, and it's kind of a more like socially conscious money podcast that I think a lot of people have found it helpful both emotionally and financially. And then I have the Just Between Us podcast, which comes out every Wednesday, and that's more of like a talk show. And the Bad with Money book, which is the thing I'm the most proud of. The Bad with Money book is a companion to the podcast, and it's also like, I think people have said it's just like also very helpful emotionally and financially. So please get that book.
Yeah, it seems like you have a very strong identity of being identified as like a writer. Seems like that's like what you're most proud of, which is awesome.
Thank you. Yeah, when I was a kid, I wanted to write a book, and I've written 2 fiction books, 1 nonfiction book, and then a graphic novel. So like I'm kind of in all genres, and I think I'm most proud of the Bad with Money book, because it was so personal and so researched, and it took me a year, and I went through my old diaries, and like I went through, like, I interviewed tons of people, and it was just like a real project. So I'm proud of it.
And for the Audible original, does that mean it's just an audio version? So you wrote it and then you just read it out loud? How does that work?
No, it's like a play. It's like an audio play. So I wrote it, and it's like a fictional story, but we had actors playing the parts, and it's like a narrative. It's like an audio book, but with characters like playing the parts.
Oh, whoa.
Yeah.
Very creative.
Yeah, it was cool. They're doing a lot of those. And it was like a really cool experience, and weird to write, because you have to write the sounds to explain what's happening. So that was a challenge as a writer.
It's almost like script writing in this case.
But different, because in a script you can see what's happening. So how do you make people understand what's going on when they can't see?
Interesting. Very cool. I might check that out.
Yeah.
I'll definitely check that out.
Thanks.
Awesome, Gaby. Well, we'll link all your social media, your website, all that stuff below for people listening on the show notes. Thank you so much for coming on. This is such a fun conversation.
Yeah,
I learned a lot, by the way.
Thank you for having me.